Hi, today I'm going to cover overheads costing, which is one of the part in cost accounting. Before I go into the chapter, I'll try to explain the classification of cost. So we have something called total cost, and total cost I divide into two: production cost and non-production cost. Right. Production cost, again we are dividing into two. Let's say variable and fixed. Here again variable and fixed. So under different bases we are dividing cost in different types. Sometimes we would divide the production cost into direct and indirect, and we would divide the non-production cost into selling, admin and other cost. So that depends on the basis of our classification. For this classification, I divide the cost into variable and fixed, right? So generally, in general terms, the production overheads which we are showing in manufacturing account, the overheads part is generally fixed. So generally overheads are fixed, mean production overheads are fixed, and we would say this as indirect. Likewise, the direct cost, which is prime cost, is known as prime cost as well, those are generally variable. It means 99% all the direct costs are variable and all the overheads or production overheads are fixed. And in non-production, most of the non-production, or again 99% of the non-production costs are fixed. Let's say admin or selling and distribution, others, all are fixed. So I would say again 99% of the non-production costs are fixed. Now tell me example for, let's say, direct variable. Raw material cost is direct variable, right? Because whenever you are increasing the produced units, your raw material consumption will increase. So it is based on the number of units. Therefore that is variable. So variable defines what? So whenever you are increasing the number of units, your cost have to increase. And fixed is what? So the cost fixed is what? Cost won't vary with the number of units, right? Fine. So tell me one example for direct but fixed, because I told you like 99% of the time, like all the direct costs are variable, right? But there's 1% where direct cost can be fixed as well. So what could be the example for that? Let's say if you are paying salary for your machine operator. So let's say if your business is manufacturing shirts, and if you are paying salary for your machine operator on a monthly basis, not based on the produced units, right? If you are paying so, that is again direct, because you are the direct labor, but fixed. Right, now tell me an example for fixed overheads. That's a common term, like commonly most of the overheads are fixed, right? Factory rent, let's say factory supervisor salary, machinery depreciation, all are fixed and comes under indirect or overheads. But there are some costs which comes under indirect but variable. Tell me an example for that. Let's say same business which is manufacturing shirts, and the cost for the button, most of the business they will calculate for a month, but sometimes some business would calculate for a shirt. For a shirt they need like 12 buttons, and what is the cost for the buttons. So that is one of the example where it is indirect but variable. So whenever they are increasing the production of shirts, the bottom cost will increase, right? Depends on the business. Most of the business, they will calculate the bottom cost for a month because they are purchasing as a pack, so they don't count the number of buttons in each pack. Fine. So the learning is what? The first learning is all direct costs are not variable, and the second one, all indirect or overheads are not fixed. So likewise, tell me an example for this. Non-production cost but variable. Let's say sales commission based on the number of units sold. Therefore, when the number of units increase, the commission will increase, right? So that is variable. You are paying sales commission to your employee based on the number of units he sold. So that is variable. But very rare. Most of the time it will be fixed, right? So this learning is important because if they test the question in MCQ, you should know the exact understanding. You should have an exact understanding of this, right? Now come back to the chapter. The chapter is overhead costing, and the objective of the chapter is to find the cost per unit and how you gonna reduce the cost per unit, right? So to find the cost, you need to include the cost related to the product, right? So this overhead costing is part of the traditional costing method. Traditional costing method. We have overhead costing and marginal costing. Overhead costing is known as absorption. So what does traditional costing mean? The costing method which introduced in 19th century, and traditional costing method generally based on the production cost. So after some time, they have come up with a solution with modern cost techniques, which are ABC costing, target costing, and so on. So in traditional costing, when we are doing question, we have to make some assumption because this was introduced like long time back. And when they introduced the traditional costing techniques, they gave more importance for the production cost. Why? Because at that time, the non-production cost impact on the sales is very less. For an example, nowadays, the marketing cost would have an impact on your selling price, on your sales as well. But in those days, they gave the importance for the production cost because the marketing cost and other costs had no impact, had like lesser impact compared to the production cost of a product. Fine. So that understanding you should have. So when it comes to traditional costing, especially for the overhead costing, right, you have to consider the production cost, or you have to give more importance for the production cost. So the marginal costing, which will be covered as a separate chapter in your A-level syllabus, right? So we're going to talk, or we're going to discuss about the overhead costing, right? So overhead costing, what is our objective? So our objectives are find cost per unit and find methods to reduce it. So we don't discuss about how we are reducing the cost, but we need to find in a way to give an impact or give an impact to make a decision for the business, like to make a decision to reduce the cost, right? The first objective is find the cost per unit, means you have to find cost for a unit. If it is variable cost, you can directly link or directly put that cost into your calculation. Why? Because variable cost means what? Means whenever you are increasing the produced units, your cost will increase, right? Therefore, you know the cost for a unit. You know what is your raw material for a unit. You know what is your fabric cost for a shirt. You know, you should know what is your wood cost for a table, right? So this one we know, but fixed cost, we don't know for a unit. We don't know how much rent we paid for a unit, how much electricity consumed for a unit, right? So variable, in this chapter we are coming from an assumption like all the direct costs are variable. All the direct costs are variable. Likewise, all the overheads are fixed. I mean, we are considering only this 99%, right? So this is just for a learning, but when it comes to this chapter, we are considering all the variable, all the direct as variable, all the overheads as fixed, right? And I already told you, like, this traditional costing method, especially overhead costing, they focused on production cost. Therefore, you need to consider about the non-production cost for the initial calculation. You need to consider the non-production cost for your initial calculation. Why? Because it didn't have much impact on those days when they are calculating the cost or when on their sales. Fine. So variable production cost, which is known as direct cost in this chapter, that we can directly link to find the production cost or for the calculation. Let's say if you know what is the raw material, let's say 100 rupees for a shirt and 100 rupees for the direct labor, then 200 is your variable production cost or your direct cost. But fixed, you can't do like that, right? So fixed is what? Rent is 50,000, electricity is 30,000, so total what is your fixed? 80,000, right? So now you can say, okay, 80,000 your fixed cost, and if you are producing 1,000 units, so your fixed cost per unit is how much? 80. So you can easily find that as well. So why we are having a separate module of absorption costing to find it, right? So that kind of question you may have. But my second objective is not only finding the cost per unit, but also you should give an impact on decision making to reduce the cost. You can't blindly say like you have to reduce the rent for the total rent of the business, total rent of the factory. You have to specifically say rent for this department has to be reduced, or supervisor salary for this department has to be reduced, or for this specific section has to be reduced, right? So that is what I meant by this one. You have to give an impact, you have to give an output to impact the decision making. So that is why they have introduced the absorption costing. Otherwise, we can just get the total of the fixed cost and divide by the units. Then you can get the cost per unit, right? So you don't have to worry about like to do the calculation and get the values, right? So in this part, total cost we divided into two: production, non-production. Non-production is not needed for the calculation. Why? Because at the early stage, we didn't have much impact on the sales by the non-production cost. Therefore, they focused on only production cost. Production cost we have variable and fixed. Variable we can directly link to the calculation. So that also fine. So we have issue with the fixed. So we have issue with the fixed production overheads, right? The assumption I already told you, all the overheads are fixed, all the direct are variable. So we have issue with fixed production overhead. What is the issue? We can't get it for a unit. We can't get it for a unit. This one we can. These two we don't need. Right? So my problem is finding cost per unit, but variable is fine. We have the issue with fixed production overhead. Right? So that is the entire chapter we're gonna study. We're gonna cover in this absorption costing or overhead costing chapter. Right. So the objectives are what? Finding cost per unit, and you have to give some input to the management to reduce the cost per unit. And we had an issue with fixed production overhead on calculating the cost per unit. So we had some issue with fixed production overheads. Right. So fixed production overheads I already explained. Let's say we have rent of 50 and let's say electricity of 30, total is 80,000. So if we are producing 1000 units, then we can easily find 80 per unit, but that won't work out because we have to make a decision as well. So if we just say 80 is your what you call fixed production overhead per unit, then no one can make a decision based on that information. Right. So I am introducing cost center and dividing into two, production and service. So what does cost center mean? Simply cost center means department. So where the cost incurred, right? So production and service. So in basic normal retail business, what are the cost center they will have? IT department will the cost center, account department will cost center, HR department will cost center, because they don't generate any profit. They are just there to incur costs, right? Likewise, in the production business or manufacturing business, we are dividing cost center into two, production and the service. So production departments and service department. What does service department mean? Production department we know, right? So if we are making a product, so we will have different departments to produce it. What does service department mean? To make that product, you may have some other department to serve those departments. For an example, in producing a car, there are 100 employees. You will have a canteen as well to serve those employees. You will have a store as well to have the equipment, have the inventories of the production department, right? So service department simply means it is there to serve the production department, right? What does production department mean? That is fine. Production department is where we are making the product. So let's have an example. We are having 3 production department. So we are producing car and we are having, let's say, fixing part. Then they will fixing tire. So there's a department to fix the tires. Then they will do the painting. So this is painting department. Service, we have store and canteen. I have to find the cost for each department. Why? Then only I can make a decision to reduce the cost. Let's say whether we have reduced the cost on canteen department or whether we have reduced the cost in store department or how we're going to do it. To make those decisions, I need to find the cost for each department. That is why I already told you, you can't just make a decision based on your total production overheads, right? For this process, to allocate the cost for each department, they have 4 steps. First step is collection of overhead, then allocation of overhead, third one apportionment of overhead, then absorption of overhead. So these are 4 steps. Our objective is what? To find the cost per unit. Variable cost is fine because we can directly relate for the calculation to find the cost per unit. But we have the issue with the fixed production overhead. Non-production we don't mind because the focus is on production cost. For that we came up with an idea to divide the cost center to have the department and to find the cost for the department. This chapter or this entire costing is about future because this comes under management accounting. You have to take a decision based on your budgeted information. What could be your selling price if your total cost is this? So you have to find it for the future. Therefore, this collection of overhead mean the budgeted overheads, the collection of budgeted overheads. In the question, they will give the cost or they will give all the budgeted overheads. What is important point? When they are giving those information, they can give the non-production cost as well. Let's say they can give the rent for the admin building. Those information you should not take to calculate or to do the process to divide the cost for this department. Obviously we know why, because that specific cost is not related to any of these department, right? So that is something else. And I am doing this working only for the production cost because my entire focus is on what? Fixed production overheads, right? So that part is important. So this chapter is about budgeted. Why it is budgeted? Because it is about the management accounting where you're going to take the decision for the future. Because if it is a past information, you can get the information from your production account itself. Production account, you have the direct material and all the information, you have the overheads. From that you can divide the total cost and you can get the total cost per unit. This one is about, to decide the future selling price, you have to find the total cost. Alright? So they can give the cost, or they can give the overheads which is budgeted. You have to use the information of budgeted fixed production overhead. If they give non-production overhead, you should not take that when you are doing the calculation for these cost center. And the second and third, allocation and apportionment, where I am introducing the word called overheads analysis sheet. So allocation and apportionment means I'm going to allocate my cost for this department because that is our entire objective to get the total cost for each department, right? So that second and third, to do the second and third step, I'm going to introduce the word overheads analysis sheet. So I'm using the word as common as overhead, but it means fixed production overheads. Because I need the cost for this production department, not for the non-production admin or any other department. So that point is very important because that is why I explain this word, the fixed production overhead. I am doing my overhead analysis sheet for the fixed production overhead to allocate the cost for these department, production department and service department. So allocation of overheads and apportionment overheads. So these two steps will be done through this analysis sheet. What is allocation of overheads and what is apportionment overheads? You obviously going to divide the cost for these departments, but allocation of overheads mean, let's say, if we exactly know what could be your indirect labor cost for each department. Let's say for the fixing part department you need 20,000. For the fixing tire department you need 50,000. Likewise, if you know exact amount for each department, that is what you call allocation. But sometimes you may not know what is your exact cost for each department. Let's say you have a building and you are paying rent of 100,000, but you don't know how much you are paying for each department because you are paying the rent as the total amount. So if that is the scenario, you're gonna use apportionment based on some base in the question. They can give, let's say, the square feet of each department. For an example, let's say if they give the total electricity, let's say the total electricity is 50,000. And if we don't know what is the electricity for each department, because sometimes you may have only one common meter reading and you will have separate meter boxes for each, right? So if you are getting only one electricity bill, then you have to divide that bill amount based on the electricity meter reading for each department. So let's say 50,000 is your electricity total bill, and do have a separate meter reading for each department. Then you will allocate based on that. That is what you call apportionment. So what is the difference between allocation and apportionment? Allocation, they have to give the cost for each department. The indirect labor cost, they will give this is the indirect labor cost for this department. But apportionment, you have to get a base, they will give that in the question, and divide based on that for each department. So these two parts will be done, or these two parts should be carried out through the overheads analysis sheet. So overheads analysis sheet would cover these two steps. Then we have the last step, which is absorption of overhead. So I'm gonna have an example to prepare the what you call overheads analysis sheet, where I will have some cost which is directly related to the department, and some cost as common like rent, electricity, and some other cost, which you have to find a base and divide among the department, right? Right. So in example, the first requirement is to prepare overheads analysis sheet. So I'm going to explain how to prepare overheads analysis sheet and what you have to show in overheads analysis sheet, right? So overheads analysis sheet. So generally we have a common format, like we put overheads here and the basis to allocate and the total overheads. Then we're gonna divide based on the department they gave in the question, right? So in this example, we have two production department, one service department, and they have something called admin as well. But for the overheads analysis sheet, we do consider only about the production departments, right? In the sense, or I can say only about the production transactions or production values, right? Therefore, I'm dividing this into two, which is production and service. So in this example, we have service called store, and production we have two, parts fixing, so I would say parts, and the other one is painting, right? So the when you are preparing the overheads analysis sheet, you have to consider how many departments you should have in the question. Sometimes they may have 3 production and 1 service, sometimes they may have 2 production and 2 service. So that depends on the question, right? So what does production mean? Where the actual product is getting produced. And what is service? Service is like kind of a supporting department for the production, where it can be store, it can be canteen, like that. So it serves the production department, fine, right? So they gave the overheads. So when they are giving overheads in the question, you have to check whether those overheads are related to manufacturing. Sometimes they may give some overheads related to admin and selling and distribution and others as well. Fine. First one. So they gave values there in thousands. So when you are preparing the overheads analysis sheet, you can prepare in 1000, right? Fine. So they gave some overheads and they gave some other information which could be used as basis, right? So I told you earlier, like when you are doing allocation and apportionment, allocation is where they will give allocated overheads for each department. Therefore you can directly put for each department. But for apportionment, they had to give some base. You have to use that base and you have to divide and you have to show for each department. Fine. The first one, indirect wages. So I would write indirect wages here. And basis. So basis generally means what is the base you're going to use. But for this one, they gave for each department, right? That means this is allocation. So I would write allocation here because they allocated and gave the values. And total is how much? 360. So I had to put the values for each department. This is 100, this is 200, and this is 60, right? So you should know the important point that we are preparing the overheads analysis sheet for what? For the fixed production overheads. For the fixed production overheads. Fine. Second one is salaries. So if we check salaries, they mentioned factory employees, then store employees, then admin employees, right? So admin employees is not needed. Why? Because we are preparing this for the only for the manufacturing side, not for the non-manufacturing overheads. Right, so salaries, factory employees 200, store employees 80, and admin employees 100. 100 is not needed. Right, I tried to write salary here. Right, and my total is how much? My total should be 280. It is not how much? It is not 380. Why? Because 100 is not needed here. Right, out of 280, 80 they gave for the store. So I can directly put 80 there in the store. Then 200. So 200, for 200 you have to use the base, because 200 they haven't divided for each department. So you have to find the base and divide and put for each department. Right. So I had to find the base for the salary. So salaries we are paying for employees. If they give something related to employees, so that would be the base. Right. So what they gave related to employees, they gave number of employees. So this base, finding base based on the question. When you are doing more question, it will be, you will be okay, you will be fine to find the base. So it is not to memorize what is the base for each overheads. It is based on the question and based on the information they are giving in the question, right? Right. So number of employees, part fixing, painting, store and admin they gave. Admin and store also we don't need. Why? Because store I put 80. So 80 is given in the question, so I can directly put 80 there. Admin is not needed because admin we are not considering when we are doing the overheads analysis sheet. So we have parts fixing and painting. They gave 150 employees for part fixing and 50 employees for painting. So my salary is 200 for the factory employees. That has to be divided. So that has to be divided. So I would write the base as number of employees, and you have to write the ratio as well. So in this question, I have to use only the first two columns, which is 150 employees and 50 employees. I don't need to use store employee count or store the number of employees for store, because I don't need that. I already put the value there. So my ratio is how much? 3:1. Right? So 3:1. I have to find for how much? 200 because they gave 200 for the factory employee salary, 80 for the store, that is done. So 200, I have to use this ratio. So if I use this ratio, for an example, 200 divided by 4 into 3 is 150 for parts, and 200 divided by 4 into 1 is 50 for painting department. That's it, right? So 200 here and 50 here. So total is 150 here, 50 here, and 80 I already put for store. The total is 280. And the next one, machinery depreciation. So machinery depreciation is my third overheads. Machinery depreciation, they gave how much? 160. I had to find the base for the machinery depreciation. So depreciation, we are using cost as a base. Why? Because normally we are finding depreciation based on cost or net book value, right? So in this question they gave bases, or they gave a table for the bases. So related to machinery we have two. First one is machine cost or machinery cost. The other one is machinery hours. Generally we are finding depreciation based on hours as well, but in advanced level syllabus we are considering cost basis and the net book value basis, right? Therefore, if they are giving cost in the question, you have to go with that. You can't use machine hours for the base. But if sometimes if they don't give that, if they don't give, like in this question, if they don't give the first one, machinery cost for department, then you will go with the machinery hours. Machinery hours mean how many hours machine work for each department, right? So in this question they gave machinery cost, they are for 200 and 120. So I would write machinery cost as my basis, and I have to write my ratio, right? So what is my ratio? If I divide by 4, this is 5 and this is 3. So if you really understand the question, so when they are giving machinery cost, they didn't give for the store. Why? Because in store, in practical scenario, store won't have any machinery, right? Because machinery is used for the production, so generally machinery would be there in the production department only, right? But if they give machinery for store, you can use that as well, right? But nowadays questions they are giving machinery cost only for the production department because they are trying to match with the practical scenario. Fine. So what is my total machinery depreciation? That is 160. So if I divide 160, how much? 160. So I don't have any machinery depreciation for store, right? Next one, insurance building. So insurance building. Right. So insurance building they gave 300. So I have to check what they gave, what is the base they gave in the question related to what you call building. So building cost is given. So when you check the building cost, they gave for parts, painting, store and admin as well. And in your budgeted information, this insurance building means the total insurance for the building. So what is the difference between this insurance building and the salaries? In salaries, they clearly mention factory employees, store employees, admin employees. In this insurance, they gave for the total. They gave the total insurance for the building, like it includes production and non-production admin and other building as well. This 300,000 insurance is for entire building, right? So my ratio or like my ratio is based on building cost, right? And what is the ratio? So 30, 15, 5 and 10. 10 is not needed, right? So my ratio will be how much? 6. If I divide by 5, this is 3, this is 1. The admin is not needed. right? So what is my building insurance? 300 is given. So 300 is for what? 300 for all the departments, right? So I have to exclude my admin depreciation. This question is very important. This exam is very important. Why? Because I try to put all different scenarios in this question. But in your final exam, which they have tested until now, they have only few scenarios. This is one of the scenario we are having where my insurance is 300, which includes the non-production as well. The first thing you have to do is exclude that. So what is the insurance for the admin? So my insurance is how much? 300. So I had to find for admin, right? So 300 is my insurance. My base is, my total is 30, 15, 5 and 10. 40, 50, 60, right? I mean, first one I took 30, then 15, then 5, then 10. So we are trying to get a total portion. So 60 and my admin is 10. So how much? It is 50, right? So I don't need this 50 because 50 is related to admin. So my total here is 250. My total here is 250, right? So 250 I going to divide among the department, right? So this is how much? 250 divided by 10 into 6, right? 25 into 6, how much? 150. This is 75 and this is 25, right? So this point is very important. The specific overheads transaction is very important. So what I did, insurance of building is given. I don't need admin. So when you check the base, they gave the base for all 4, and the insurance of building means the total insurance for the entire building. So I had to remove the admin one. So admin I found 50. So I removed that, so remaining is 250. 250 I have to split, I have to divide among the production and service department, right? Then they gave factory rent. So factory rent. So this word is important. So they clearly mention this is factory rent. So you don't have to worry about, you don't have to consider about the admin thing, right? So what is my factory rent? My factory rent is 240, so I can put 240 here. That is my total. So what is my what you call base? So they gave floor area, right? So if you check the floor area, square feet they give. So if you check the floor area, they gave for the admin as well, that is not needed. So I need only 6,000, 4,000, 2,000. So I put 6 into 4 into 2, right? So this is half, 120, right? So 60, how much? 120, 80 I guess, and this is 40, right? Yeah. So that is the factory rent. Then they gave factory electricity. So factory electricity, so what is the base we are going to use? So they gave about electricity, the kilowatt hours, so electricity kilowatt, right? So factory electricity how much? They gave 60. So factory means store as well, because they clearly mention on the top that this factory includes, or the store as a service center in the same factory building, right? So factory includes store as well. Fine. So electricity kilowatt is how much? 5, 3, 4. So this is 5, 3 and 4, right? So how much? 12, 25, 15 and 20, right? So these are the overheads they gave. So in these overheads, I had different scenarios. First one is allocation, where they gave the split. So I just directly put that and I put allocation here. The second one, salary. So when they gave salary, they gave the salary for the store. So I put that. Then they gave the salary, factory salary. So factory salary in the sense like part and painting, for the production salary. So 150 and 50, that is fine. Then machine depreciation, in this one the business didn't have any machine, or they don't have any machine in the stress service, so I just left it. The next one is insurance building. Insurance building means in this question the entire building, which includes admin as well. So I have to remove admin first. The remaining I have to split among the department. Then factory rent, so they mentioned the word factory here. Factory means the entire place, parts, painting and store included. So I divide and put. Here I don't need to consider about the admin, because factory rent means only factory related overheads. Then again factory electricity, so I have to split and put, right? Then what I supposed to do is I get the total of this. So when you're getting the total, you don't need to get the total of this column, because again the same thing, you're not going to use that this value in your calculation. Therefore no need to calculate the sum of this, right? So I can get the total 140, 180, 200, 225, then 250, 310, 390, 400, 480, right? 250, 310, 390, 400, right? 250, 350, 450, 500, 600, 640, 5. So these are the overheads or production or fixed production overheads for each department, for 2 production department and 1 store department, which is service department, right? So this is part of your question. You should know how to use base. You should know what to be included and what to be excluded. So admin and other expense should be excluded. Then you should know to use the base and get the correct value in each column. So what is the important point here is, the important point is like when you're doing the calculation, you have to get the correct value. Why? Because this value is going to be used for the next calculation. So if you are getting any value, any amount in decimal in your calculation, then what you do is you start checking the answers again. So that will take more time. So when you are doing this splitting part, so you have to spend some time and get the exact value, right? Because you know for the fact, if you are getting any answer in decimal, generally for the what you call the next step, which is OAR, so I'll explain later. So when you're getting some answer in decimal, your answer is obviously wrong. So if you know that fact, so you start checking the question again. This will take some more time when you are doing in your final exam. So for that, you have to spend some time and you have to do the calculation in the correct manner, right? I got the total, so I'm going to use this total for the next steps, right? So we got the total cost for each department. So what is our objective? Our objective is to find the cost per unit. If it is variable cost, it is fine, right? Because we know cost or variable cost for each unit. When it comes to fixed cost, we had issue, especially for production fixed overheads. Therefore, we introduced this method, which is overhead analysis sheet, where we are trying to get the cost, trying to get the overheads for each department. Now we got the total for each department, right? Here we have parts, painting and store. So this store department is why it exists, to serve the production department, right? So if we know, let's say if we produce 1000 units, what we can do is we can divide this by 1000 and we can get what is the cost per unit in parts department. Then if we divide this by 1000, then we will get to know what is the cost per unit in painting department. If we divide this by 1000, then we get to know what is the cost for store, what is the cost per unit in store department. But store is there to serve these departments, right? So we had to allocate or reallocate or redistribute this 225 to the production. Because let's say in this example, this is parts and this is painting, right? Sometime in store, the parts department would take like huge space compared to the painting, because we have to store all the parts in this department in our warehouse. Compared to storing painting, parts would take more space, right? Therefore, you can't just divide this by number of units and get the cost per unit in store. So that is what we call reallocate, because this 225 is there, which is related to the production somehow, because it is serving the production department. So they will give the base for the reallocate. Let's say if it is store, what is the number of units requested, or what is the requisition, number of unit requisition by each department. Sometimes parts department would have more requisition. Therefore, this 225 has to be reallocated or redistributed, which is what we call secondary distribution, right, to the department based on the usage. Let's say canteen. So let's say this as a canteen. So canteen, our total cost is 200. Why canteen is there? Maybe employees who works in the production department using canteen for their food, right? So if parts department has more number of employees, then what happened? Means this canteen department total cost should be related to the parts more, right? Because parts department employees use the canteen more compared to the painting department, right? So like that, this 225 is not equally used by these departments, right? Therefore, this 225 has to be distributed or has to be allocated for the production department. For that, they should give the base. If it is canteen, they would give number of employees, for an example. If it is store, they would give something related to store, or else they would say what is the percentage. Let's say 225,000 is your total, 60% is for this department and 40% is for the painting department. We can't keep this as it is. Why? Because this is there to serve the production, so we have to reallocate to the production department, right? Fine. So I am reallocating service, so I would write here as store, right? So I have to find the base. So if you check the question, so in the question additional information, they mention something about the raw material issued to the production. From where they issue the raw material? Obviously from the store. So they gave that information to find the base, right? So they gave 300 and 150. So I would write the base here as what you call raw material issued, and my ratio is how much? So if I divide by 5, this is 6 into 3, right? Or I can say 2:1, right? So 225, 2:1, how much? 75, 1. So this is reallocated or redistributed for the production department, right? So we would say in this question, we would say this as primary distribution and this as secondary distribution. So what does secondary distribution or reallocation mean? It is simply we are reallocating or redistributing the cost of the store for the production department based on the usage, based on the basis they gave to reallocate, right? Now we got the total cost, 795, 555, right? Yeah. So this is the total fixed production overhead for each department. First department has 795,000 and second department, which is painting department, has 555,000. So the first part of the chapter is to prepare the overheads analysis sheet. So where I discuss different scenario like having allocation and having the value for the admin, how to do the question, how to allocate when they are giving admin, which is non-production department, and when they are giving cost for the specific department, you have to directly put for the department. For an example, this 80. So once you are done with this, you should know how to find the base and how to use the base to split the value for the department. Once you're done with the first part, which is primary distribution, then you have to split this amount, which is service department, to the production back. Why? Because the service is there to serve production department, so you have to divide, or you have to divide and put the value for the production department based on the base they give in the question, right? So this is the first part, overheads absorption rate. We are using that, we are having formulas that is very straightforward, and finding the value for a unit. So that part, that section, I'll cover in the next video. Thank you guys.